Good afternoon, I'm Herman Green with the Midday News. A special welcome to those of you watching online at onespotmedia.com. We begin with news that the Ministry of Health has called an emergency press conference to make an announcement on the COVID-19 coronavirus. Now our reporter Shamela Pullen is there, and we're joining her live to hear what's happening at the press conference. Shamela.
Thank you, Herman. The Minister of Health called an emergency press briefing. We're here on standby. The health technocrats are not here as yet to make that big announcement that we're here waiting for. But until then, it's back to you, Herman.
All right, thank you, Shamela. So the Ministry of Health has called that press conference. It's scheduled for 12 o'clock. So we're waiting for the minister to take the seat and make his announcement. In the meanwhile, the Health Ministry is seeking to assure Jamaicans that the man who ran away from a quarantine facility in St. Andrew Monday evening is not a threat to society. Speaking at a media briefing this morning, Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton said the 27-year-old man, who is from a St. Mary address, has not been exhibiting symptoms of the novel coronavirus COVID-19. He was held in the Waltham Park area sometime after 2 o'clock this morning during an operation by the police and the Ministry of Health. However, the incident raises questions for security to be beefed up at these quarantine facilities.
There would be a technical assessment done to determine who the person was in contact with. My understanding is that the person went and visited a female friend or companion, and that was the sort of extent of their contact. Obviously, in transit to that location, one would have to examine. It's important also to know that the person did not display any symptoms. They're in observation, and they still have not. So there is no need to be too alarmed unless something happens beyond that. And remember now, the virus spreads when persons are displaying symptoms.
Now, Dr. Tufton said the man breached the law and could be charged based on the Quarantine Act. And the Ministry of Health says to date, 243 travelers who have been seen as persons of interest landed at the country's international airports. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Jacqueline Bissessa McKenzie says 63 of those individuals have been refused entry, 23 placed in quarantine, and 9 in isolation. Dr. Bissessa McKenzie says the latest person who has been placed in isolation took place yesterday.
8 persons that had come in straight from the airports or from community who went straight to the emergency department of the hospital if they came in from the community, or straight from the airports to isolation. And those 8 persons were tested negative. So we have one additional person yesterday who presented at an emergency department of one of our hospitals and has now been isolated. The samples have been taken off and the tests are being done, and we expect that today we will get back those results.
And just a reminder that we are still on standby. We're waiting for the emergency press conference called by the Ministry of Health for an announcement on the COVID-19 coronavirus. So as soon as the minister is ready, we will be joining him live. In the United States, the Grand Princess cruise ship on Monday docked in Oakland, California. At least 21 of its crew members and passengers are infected with the novel coronavirus. We have more from the CNN.
Barred from port for 5 days, at least 21 coronavirus cases on board, the Grand Princess finally pulls in.
First of all, there are some children there who are compromised. They want to get them off.
Every passenger will be screened, then treated or quarantined at military bases in California and beyond.
We may have to stay on the ship for a few more days. It's going to be quite a lengthy process.
Meanwhile, off Florida, a sister ship, the Caribbean Princess, now under a no-sail order because 2 crew members were previously on ships with a positive case. Up in Washington state, where 19 have died at this nursing home and beyond, echoes of a nationwide concern that a lack of early testing hurt containment. Debbie de Los Angeles' mother died, says they're still waiting on her test result.
They said, well, tests were short, there was a shortage.
The nursing home says all remaining residents have now been tested. Colleges and school districts in Washington State, California and New York, among others, closing classrooms. The Empire State now taking the initiative, using prisoners to manufacture up to 100,000 gallons of hand sanitizer a week.
Because you can't get it on the market, and when you get it, it's very, very expensive.
Last Monday morning, there were 89 confirmed cases in this country. Today, we topped 600.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says there are numerous lessons that the world must learn from China in the treatment of the coronavirus. This analysis from the WHO, as China has reported drastic reductions in the number of infections from over 2,000 cases per day to now just over 100 cases per day.
The big lessons, first of all, that we learned from China, you don't learn in Wuhan. In Wuhan, you learn what can go wrong if you let this virus run. And for China at that early stage, remember, new virus, never seen before, didn't have a diagnostic, didn't know what would happen. We didn't know how to control it. So this is what happens. But what we've learned from the other areas of China, there's 31 provinces. All of them got infected. None of them had the experience of Wuhan because they acted differently. And first, they went fast. Speed meant so much. Secondly, to get that speed, they mobilized the whole population. The population, the people became their surveillance system to help find this disease, prevent the disease, but when it did occur, rapidly get isolated so that they didn't spread it to others. And that was because the population knew what the problem was, and they were a big part of the solution. That is the big, big lesson. You cannot do this by government. You cannot do it by the health authorities alone. You need it all working in sync. That's the critical piece.
And just a reminder that the Ministry of Health has called an emergency press conference, and we're standing by to hear from the minister. It was scheduled for 12 o'clock, but the minister has not taken the seat as yet to address us. So we're still waiting to hear from him on that. We now take a break here on the Midday News, but please stay with us. We have more news when we return. Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. And we continue as we are awaiting the press conference from the Ministry of Health, where the minister is should be having an emergency press conference on the COVID-19. You're now seeing images from the location where we expect the minister to take the seat any minute now to give us that update. We're standing by for that press conference. Our reporter Shamela Pullen is there, and she is on standby to give us the latest on whatever is announced or whatever is presented at that press conference. In the meantime, a top-level meeting is scheduled for today at tourism interests grapple with the imminent threat of COVID-19. This comes as the United States issued a travel warning telling citizens not to go on a cruise. Jamaica's tourism minister, Edmund Bartlett, is insisting that the negative impact of COVID-19 can be minimized if stakeholders adhere to protocols. Andrea Chisholm spoke with him yesterday.
Uncertainty and fear gripped crew and passengers on the Grand Princess cruise ship as news surfaced that a man on the ship contracted COVID-19 and later died. Over 20 people who were on the ship tested positive for the virus. That contributed to the U.S. State Department urging citizens, especially those with underlying health conditions, not to go on a cruise. Out of an abundance of caution, Jamaica has denied entry to at least 2 cruise ships as COVID-19 fears intensify. So why not a complete ban?
I think you ban if you can't manage. And if everybody is committed to doing their part to make sure that the protocols are observed.
The tourism minister indicated that cruise lines are further scrutinizing passengers, checking medical and travel history before allowing them to go cruising. And so that sector, along with other stakeholders, including hotels and attractions, will attend a high-level meeting on Tuesday.
And first of all, do a situation analysis that the Director of Tourism will provide. And then we would have a discussion with the sectors, making, first of all, their input as they see it, as it is affecting their element of the sector. And then afterwards, we have a general discussion, and then we look at the way forward.
Edmund Bartlett adds that the tourism product development company TPDCO will be working closely with officials from the health ministry.
TPDCO is going to spearhead that whole area of dealing with the protocols and making sure that the education that is required in the hotels and the attractions everywhere. We will be ensuring that posters are everywhere, that information about how to do whatever, and also that physical facilities are in the hotels and the places of attraction so that people can wash their hands, people can wipe their hands and so on.
3 things will be guiding decisions: scientific evidence, facts, and wise leadership.
We think, and it's still holding, that at the end of the year we could come out at about 1% up and a 1.5 or 2% up in earnings. So basically then, Jamaica is not projecting a loss over last year. What we are projecting is a reduction in the rate of growth over last year.
Meanwhile, Jamaica has banned travel from 5 countries which have recorded thousands of COVID-19 infections: Iran, China, South Korea, Singapore, and Italy. In the U.S., over 30 of the 50 states have confirmed cases.
Are we contemplating a ban on the United States as well?
That's a question, in all fairness, that has to be answered at another place. We are focused heavily on how do we ensure that, along with health, only the right people come to Jamaica and that we are not exposed at all.
Andrea Chisholm, TVJ News.
In the meantime, there's a call from the World Health Organization for governments to ensure the protection of health workers as countries spring into action to contain the spread of COVID-19. The pronouncement was made yesterday at the WHO press conference.
As at March 9, more than 100 countries had recorded cases of the coronavirus. A breakdown from the World Health Organization points to more than 100,000 cases, while the global death toll has also risen to more than 3,000. The WHO is still not calling it a pandemic, but says it's close.
We're reaching that point, and when you reach 100 countries, and when you reach 100,000 cases, it is time to step back and think. 2 weeks ago, there was 30 or 40 countries. So now it's 100 countries. And that's not a quantitative measure, but it is a qualitative measure of what direction we're going in.
The WHO, however, remains optimistic that the virus can be contained.
It would be the first pandemic in history that could be controlled. The bottom line is we're not at the mercy of the virus. The great advantage we have is that the decisions we all make as governments, businesses, communities, families, and individuals can influence the trajectory of this epidemic.
Scientists are still scrambling to learn as much as they can about the virus. Additionally, the WHO says it's taking a comprehensive look at who is at higher risk for death.
This is not data as of today, but data from earlier, that mortality among people who are over 80 is highest amongst the age group, and the mortality is above 20%. There is higher mortality for people who have underlying conditions. For example, for those with cardiovascular disease, around 13%. For those who have diabetes, around 9%. For those with chronic respiratory disease, around 8%. And for those with cancer, around 7.5%. Now, these numbers, are based on a subset of the total cases that have been reported to date.
Meanwhile, the WHO views as critical the need for adequate medical gear for health workers who will be dealing with COVID-19 infected patients.
The very minimum we can give those frontline workers is the PPE and the training, and the management arrangements so we can manage their stress and their fatigue. And I think most countries are moving to do that, and that's why we spoke earlier about this issue of requisitioning of PPE. The real tragedy, I think, in the coming days and weeks will be the moral hazard and the dilemma that health workers may face if they've got COVID-19 patients in front of them who need help and they don't have the protective equipment to protect themselves? Would you like to be that health worker? Would you like to be a doctor or a nurse having to treat a patient knowing full well that you are not protected? That's an awful dilemma that no health worker in the world should have to face.
And just a reminder that we are on standby. We're waiting to join the Ministry of Health for an emergency press conference for an announcement on COVID-19 coronavirus. The minister is supposed to address the conference. It was scheduled for 12 o'clock, and we are waiting for him to get to the venue to speak to us on that update. In the meantime, as COVID-19 continues to affect several sectors, head coach of the Sprintec Track Club, Maurice Wilson, says he believes there is a strong possibility the Olympic Games won't be held because of the threat of COVID-19. But Wilson says he is still preparing his athletes as normal despite those concerns. Jordan Fort has the details.
The spread of COVID-19 has affected a number of sporting events thus far and has been raising questions over the staging of this summer's Olympics in Tokyo, Japan. But while saying he thinks there is a 65% chance the Games won't be held, Jamaica and Sprintec track and field head coach Maurice Wilson says he is still preparing his athletes with a July start date in mind.
As of now, we are preparing as if the Olympics is in July because we do have obligations that we must meet.
But there has also been talk of possibly shifting the date of the Olympics, with it being said that they have until as late as December to have the Games.
If the Olympics is held in December, it's definitely going to have an effect on most of the athletes who would have been training. Because remember, we would have been coming out of a season where the World Championships was in October. And so for the interim, we will continue to train as we have been training, await the information. If it goes to December, then we will have to now take a break, look at what is in front of us, and recalibrate. We would have to come again then, put it that way, in terms of our preparations.
Track and field's premier seasonal event, the Diamond League, is set to get going in just over a month's time and will feature meets in China and Italy, countries which have been grappling with the widespread outbreak of the virus. Wilson was also asked about the possibility of a financial hit that his club could take if athletes aren't able to travel to compete in the various Diamond League meets.
I really don't even want to think about that because I would have said earlier, we were preparing athletes for the World Indoor Championships. This is the first year we have made significant investment in terms of sending athletes abroad to get the qualifying time to run at World Indoors, and World Indoors have been cancelled. And so the losses would have started from January.
But what if his athletes were to decide on their own that they would take the risk to travel for the Diamond League meets?
Well, athletes are individuals. They are not, in my case, they are not contracted to any organization that determines what they do. So it is an individual choice. What I will say though, I'm almost sure that in terms of staffing, I cannot guarantee that any of the Sprintec staff would be supporting such a venture.
This summer's Olympics is set to run from July 24 to August 9 in Tokyo, Japan.
And just a reminder that we are awaiting an emergency press conference at the Ministry of Health, where Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton and his team is expected to give an update on the COVID-19 virus. We go on to other news. A major explosion at the Tower restaurant on Knutsford Boulevard in New Kingston brought the business district to a standstill this morning. At news time, emergency crews were still at the location. TVJ News understands that about minutes to 11, a loud explosion was heard, then fire and smoke were seen coming from the building. It's believed that a gas leak from the restaurant's cylinders caused the catastrophe. At least one motor vehicle, which was parked in front of the building, was destroyed. There are no reports of injuries. And we now go back to reports on the coronavirus as the public health system is bracing to deal with thousands of additional sick people should COVID-19 reach Jamaica. $2 billion has been set aside to bolster the system. In the meantime, an aggressive sensitization program on proper hygiene is to be rolled out. More from Dwayne Anderson.
A near $2 billion response plan is in place should COVID-19 reach Jamaica. And a large chunk of that money will be spent in the health sector due to the strain it could come under. Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton said an assessment has been done and health facilities could be asked to respond to tens of thousands of additional persons seeking health care.
Some 800,000 will seek medical care in public and private facilities. At the height of the outbreak, we could see as much as 35,000 or so people seeking care within a given week. Close to 50% of the more than 800,000 persons we expect to access care in our public health facilities. At the height of the outbreak, we could see approximately 16,000 persons in a week. Further, just about 2,000 of the cases visiting public health facilities we anticipate will experience severe acute respiratory infection requiring hospital care. And of this number, some 360 will require critical care.
But that's all if. So while the virus is not in Jamaica, the authorities will try to keep it out. So far, travel restrictions have been imposed on 5 countries: Singapore, China, South Korea, Italy, and Iran. The minister insists the authorities will ban countries as the need arises. Funds will also be spent to sensitize the public about the importance of proper hygiene.
The success of our efforts is contingent on the support of all Jamaicans, including the deliberate efforts to access and share accurate information on the virus, thus helping to minimize the fears and anxiety that has been associated with the spread of the COVID-19. At the same time, we must, in keeping with good hygiene, maintain a distance of at least 2 meters from persons who are coughing or sneezing, frequently perform hand hygiene by washing hands thoroughly with soap and water or using a hand sanitizer if hands are not visibly soiled, cover our mouths and noses when coughing or sneezing with a tissue and then discarding it, and avoid touching our faces and each other unnecessarily.
The COVID-19 response plan received the approval of Prime Minister Andrew Holness following a meeting with the National Disaster Risk Management Council last week. Dwayne Anderson, TVJ News.
And we remind you once again that we are standing by to hear from the Ministry of Health. They are holding an emergency press conference on COVID-19. We're expecting the minister to address the audience there, and we'll be carrying it live, so to address the public also, our viewers, as soon as possible. So our reporter, Shamela Pullen, she's also there. She will be giving us an update, details on whatever is announced, whatever is presented at that emergency press conference. In the meantime, a controversial research paper is claiming that COVID-19 has split into 2 distinct strains and that it is possible for persons to be infected with both. The research was done through a joint study by researchers from multiple Chinese universities. Andrew Laidley has the details.
Scientists in China studying the outbreak of the novel coronavirus say they have discovered 2 main strains of the virus affecting humans. The researchers cautioned that their study looked only at a limited range of data and said follow-up studies or larger data sets were needed to better understand the virus's evolution. The preliminary study found that a more aggressive strain of the novel coronavirus associated with the outbreak in Wuhan accounted for about 70% of analyzed cases, while 30% were linked to a less aggressive type. They say the prevalence of the more aggressive virus decreased after early January. Suspicions heightened when this Australian couple, Karen and Jason Honey, both tested positive for the virus but exhibited completely different symptoms.
Karen's illness began with a few aches, progressing to coughing and a high fever. But curiously, Jason has no symptoms despite testing positive.
I've had no fevers, no coughs, no nasal problems, no aches, no pains, nothing.
So you're feeling fine?
Yeah, I'm fine. I've not had a single symptom of any sort.
The World Health Organization agrees that the novel coronavirus, like all other viruses, mutates or undergoes small changes in its genome. But not every expert is convinced a more aggressive strain exists. Other experts argue the 2 types the Chinese researchers claimed to have identified were a result of both normal viral mutation and errors in data that they were relying on. In the meantime, the researchers are warning that the effects of COVID-19 on the human body is like a combination of SARS and AIDS, as it damages both the lungs and immune systems. The World Health Organization says some people who contracted the virus will show symptoms, others will not, and 80% will recover without needing special treatment. Andrew Laidley, TVJ News.
And just in case you're wondering why we have this many COVID-19 stories in the midday newscast, we are on standby. We're waiting for the health ministry. They're having an emergency press conference on COVID-19, an announcement on COVID-19 virus. We spoke to the Minister of Health, Dr. Christopher Tufton, just a short while ago. He said he will be starting that press conference within another 3 or so minutes. So we will be carrying that live. You can stay tuned to get all the details from that press conference as soon as he begins. Now, just a bit of background here. This morning, we got this from the Ministry of Health, a press release that says the Ministry of Health and Wellness is currently monitoring a patient in isolation. The person of interest presented at hospital on Monday, March 9, with some respiratory symptoms, and checks revealed that the patient's travel history included travel to a country that has confirmed cases of COVID-19. So we're not clear on what the announcement will be, but we are standing by to hear from the minister what is this emergency announcement on the COVID-19 coronavirus. In the meanwhile, the World Health Organization says there are numerous lessons that the world must learn from China in the treatment of the coronavirus. Now, this analysis is from the WHO, as China has reported drastic reductions in the number of infections from over 2,000 cases per day to now 100 per day.
The big lessons, first of all, that we learned from China, you don't learn in Wuhan. In Wuhan, you learn what can go wrong if you let this virus run. And for China at that early stage, remember, new virus, never seen before, didn't have a diagnostic, didn't know what would happen. We didn't know how to control it. So this is what happens. But what we've learned from the other areas of China, there's 31 provinces. All of them got infected. None of them had the experience of Wuhan because they acted differently. And first, they went fast. Speed meant so much. Secondly, to get that speed, they mobilized the whole population. The population, the people became their surveillance system to help find this disease, prevent the disease, but when it did occur, rapidly get isolated so that they didn't spread it to others. And that was because the population knew what the problem was, and they were a big part of the solution. That is the big, big lesson. You cannot do this by government. You cannot do it by the health authorities alone. You need it all working in sync. That's the critical piece.
Now, a top-level meeting is scheduled for today as tourism interests grapple with the imminent threat of COVID-19. This comes as the United States issued a travel warning telling citizens not to go on a cruise. And we'll be holding that story as we understand that the minister is now ready for that press conference. As you can see, images live from the Ministry of Health. Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton now taking the seat to address the country, to address the audience on COVID-19. Our reporter Shemela Pullen is present. She'll be there to give us a report on whatever information is presented, whatever details we can get from that press conference.
Okay. Where is Dr. Bruce? Not here yet. You have a chair there, just when he comes, he can sit. Okay. Okay. Let's pull it back first. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just apologize for the delay in starting. All right, so let me welcome all of you, and I'm going to read from a statement, at which point we can deal with any questions that may flow from that. So thank you for joining us this afternoon for what is an important development with the coronavirus disease 2019, or COVID-19 as it is referred to. Jamaica today confirmed its first imported case of coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-2019. here in Kingston. The patient is a Jamaican female who had traveled from the United Kingdom, which, as you know, has cases of COVID-19. She arrived in the island on March 4th, presented to the public health system on March 9th, and has been in isolation since then. Based on the patient's travel history and symptoms, health professionals suspected COVID-19 when she presented herself. A clinical sample was collected and sent to the National Influenza Center, where lab tests confirmed the diagnosis today at approximately 11 a.m. The patient and family members have been informed of the development. The patient's infection was travel-related based on the assessment. However, steps are being taken to prevent the risk of community spread. These measures include the dispatch of a health team to the home of the patient for assessment and initiation of public health measures, the identification and contact tracing for all possible exposed persons, meeting of ministry officials with members of staff at the hospital, and the necessary interventions that are required to be put in place. In addition, imposed travel restrictions remain in place. In fact, 3 countries have been added to the list of the 5 that were originally announced. China, Italy, South Korea, Singapore, and Iran are the original countries that was previously made public. We have added to that Spain, France, and Germany. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and I met this morning with the ambassadors of those countries as well as the EU ambassador, and have informed them that based on the risk assessment of community spread of the virus in those countries, that travel restrictions would be imposed. Further, as part of the overall strategy that was put in effect some time ago, I would like to advise the public to continue to observe and perhaps strengthen their sensitivities to public gatherings, which we are discouraging, non-essential travel. We continue to patrol irregular border crossings, sensitization of key personnel at all air and seaports will continue. We have designated 4 quarantine facilities and others will be identified, and those are being used or being prepared to be used. And we are finalizing the retrofitting of isolation facilities in each of the island's public hospitals. On the readiness of the island's health system, the ministry has developed the local capacity to test for the virus, which we did, which has led to the confirmation of this particular case, thanks to training support and material support from the Pan American Health Organization. Assess the readiness of our health facilities to meet the anticipated increase in demand on services. Continue to address existing gaps, including with respect of additional supplies and equipment through, at the present time, we have enough personal protective equipment in the island for our health facilities. We also have adequate stores of respiratory medicine for the next 3 months with additional supplies on demand. And we continue, of course, to train our public health caregivers in the event that they are required to support persons who are so affected. These efforts are supported, of course, by a communications campaign to keep each member of the population updated on the virus and its impact, and with oversight that is being provided by the Honorable Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, led National Disaster Risk Management Council. And I've had a conversation with the Honorable Prime Minister when we learned of this development, and I know he has been in contact with the Leader of the Opposition, informing him of this latest development. So we're taking an whole of society approach with our national leaders fully informed. I have also named a COVID-19 response advisory team that will support the Ministry of Health and Wellness in our planning and coordination with respect to this public health challenge. So this team will work with us within the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Of course, we report to the National Disaster Response Committee, which is a much more broader team, multi-stakeholder, multi-agency team. The members of this advisory team for the Ministry of Health and Wellness are Mr. Howard Mitchell, former president of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, Mr. Christopher Zaka, who is currently president of Sagicor, CEO of Sagicor, Mr. Owen Ellington, former commissioner of police, Reverend Devon Dick, Jamaica Baptist Union, Dr. Marina Rankisoon, Deputy Associate Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences at UWI, Commander Wens Gorman, and Lieutenant Colonel Sidney Powell of the JDF, and ACP Calvin Allen of the JCF. The ministry is also urging the public to adhere to infection prevention and control measures as a standard operating procedure. In fact, it is more important now than ever, which includes maintaining a distance of at least 1 meter from persons who are coughing or sneezing, frequently perform hand hygiene by washing hands thoroughly with soap and water, or using a hand sanitizer if hands are not visibly soiled, cover our mouths and noses with a tissue when coughing or sneezing and then discarding it, and resist the habit to touch our faces. For additional information, we encourage the public to visit our website, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, or contact the number 888-1-LOVE. That's 888-663-5683. I would like to use the opportunity to appeal to the public to remain calm in the face of this most recent development and to implement all the advisories related to personal hygiene, social distancing, and overall infection prevention control. I'd like to reassure the public that the government of Jamaica, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, is doing all that is necessary to keep the public informed, to establish the necessary infrastructure to confront this particular issue. And frankly speaking, we anticipated from some time ago that this day, there was a strong possibility that this day would come, given the pace of the spread of this virus globally and the internal spread, and the fact that as a society we're part of the global community with relatively open borders. So we have been preparing in the event of today, and we have now just triggered the next phase of the response, which, because of an imported case, would include as a priority containment of the particular case so as to prevent the community transmission, which would be another phase. But we still feel that the country needs to be informed, be alert, and to take the necessary precautions as an absolute preventative measure. The other point I'd like to say is that we are doing what is necessary to trace persons who have come in contact with this particular individual, and we have already made contact with individuals, family members. We have already established a protocol, if you will, that they be confined to a particular space, to their homes, and further assessment of that situation is ongoing as we speak. And again, that is in keeping with the protocol of containment once a case would have been identified, and in this case, an imported case. So I will end here and entertain questions, but I'm going to ask the representative from the University Hospital of the West Indies to take a seat. Are they here? No? Okay. All right. They're on their way because I suspect you may want to ask some questions as it relates to the institution. The Chief Medical Officer is here, and of course the Permanent Secretary. So we'll entertain questions now.
Good morning. Anthea Saunders from the Jamaica Observer. Just a bit of clarification. Minister, you said that medicinal supplies are available for the next 3 months. and that additional supplies will be available on demand. What exactly does that mean?
Right.
Is it that you'll be sourcing?
Right. So what I'm saying is that based on our assessment of inventory, I have been advised that we have enough medicines for patients who have respiratory-related ailments, which is associated with this disease, and could provide those supplies up to the next 3 months. I'm also told by the NHF that additional supplies are on order, and therefore we would expect to bolster the inventory as needed during that period of time. During that period of time, yes.
Do you foresee any difficulty with getting those supplies that have been ordered?
I am relying on the information from the National Health Fund and the team there, and they would have done their sort of surveys with suppliers throughout the country and beyond, because they deal with overseas suppliers also. And they have said to me that they have strong relationships and are therefore confident that they'll be able to replenish supplies as needed.
What's the protocol for sporting events such as boys and girls camps going forward?
Okay, so decisions are going to have to be made in the not too distant future as it relates to these public gatherings. I know that Cabinet took a decision last evening for the Ministry of Education to advise as it relates to the pen relays, and schools by now should have been advised that the government is taking a position to not participate in the pen relays this year because that travel and the location could involve levels of risks that we would like to discourage. And so we are, well, I'm saying it now publicly, but we were going to actually put an advisory out against that travel. As it relates to boys and girls champs, there is a meeting scheduled between the organizers, the Minister of Sports, and the Minister of Education and myself, and the main sponsor. I think Grace Kennedy, of course, is the main sponsor, where a decision will be taken. And that decision should be taken within 24 hours. But needless to say, the fact that we now have a case, nevertheless an imported case, it does elevates the concerns as it relates to public gatherings. And that could be applied to all major public gatherings for the time being.
Another question, why did it take 5 days for the person to be presented to the health facility? Did the surveillance protocol not work?
No, I mean, the country from where the person traveled, the UK, I think this person enjoys dual citizenship. They're Jamaican, but with a UK citizenship. And I don't want to go into too much details about the individual, but the person traveled. They would have been screened, as all passengers would be at the airport, but they were not on the list of countries that would have been quarantined. Remember, we had some specific countries based on the internal spread. The UK, even though it has the virus, and it is getting worse, would not have represented one of those high risk at the time. But so the person would have been screened in the normal course of activities at the port of entry. But having arrived, one of the things that we tell persons who come in is that they must also self-assess, and they are given documentation to that effect. And I think the person did not, based on what the investigation suggests, have symptoms until later, days after arriving. And having had those symptoms, they went to see their doctor, which led to all the other things that have transpired.
Anthony, look, with that being said, Minister, I'm sure there could be many more cases like this that come into the country. So how do we stop this or prevent this?
For example, the U.S., what measures are placed now?
there are no guarantees as it relates to, or absolutes as it relates to the spread of this virus. And I think we have said that. There are no, the only absolute from preventing an imported case is to shut Jamaica off from the rest of the world. And even so, under the legal framework, you can't shut Jamaica off from Jamaicans who are all over the world and want to come back home. What you do is quarantine them. So the reality is, as the virus spreads, it increases the possibilities and the exposure, which is why we said in the early stages of public education and information that a key part of the strategy was to delay, to allow us time to plan for the eventuality or the possibility of it coming. In other words, restricting where the risk was greatest while preparing our internal infrastructure, personnel, training, sensitization, so that the more the risk increases globally, is the more likely it will. Remember now that the virus is in about 112 countries, the last 60 countries or so over the last 3 weeks. So it's really moving at a very rapid rate. We are like the fifth or sixth Caribbean island to have the virus. So we have been able to delay to a certain point. And what is very important for us in this phase is to contain, to prevent community spread. Hence the measures that are being taken. I don't know if the CMO wants to comment further on that. Yes. All right, let me ask the CMO to respond to that. CMO.
Again, we would want to reiterate that our basic premise is that persons who do not have symptoms are not transmitting the virus, okay? That is what we have based our interventions on. This person became symptomatic while in the island. So at the time that the person was in the airplane, the person did not report any symptoms, okay?
With that being said, can you walk me through how the ministry plans to carry out its contact tracing and disinfecting the areas where this person would have traveled to and so forth?
Sure. Okay, so our main interest and big focus at this point is going to be enabling resources to do the contact tracing. So we would be looking at the transportation that brought the person in, the home situation. We would be tracking where and where this person has been, what kind of events they have attended to, and that will give us an assessment of what kind of risk. Is the risk confined to one home? Is the risk confined to a community? Is it confined to several communities? And we would have to put in measures based on that. Once we have gotten the immediate contacts of those persons, we will be looking at quarantine for those persons. Depending on how many persons are involved in terms of our investigations, then we will be looking to self-quarantine. And of course, at this time, we would want all our primary care facilities, public and private, to be on alert because they must get a travel history, contact history from persons that are coming in with any kind of influenza-like illness or flu-like illness, any cough, respiratory symptoms. So I think that is where our aim has to be, for everybody to be sensitized to what is happening, have a more increased level of awareness so that they can report to the public health authorities that we can do the necessary investigations and containment as necessary.
Yes.
Able to say also what parish we're talking about? As in the whole?
I certainly can. The question is, should I? And one of the challenges, let me just say, I mean, nothing is a secret in Jamaica, as you know. And I would prefer I say it rather than others start to speculate. But I want to say before I say the parish that we really ought to, urging the public to, as difficult as it is, to exercise some control over the propensity to seek out, to further inquire, or worse, to be overly assertive in whatever way, shape, or form around an affected individual or affected home environment. And I'm saying it for reasons that I think I need to say it. I don't want persons to be intimidated or abused in any way, shape, or form because they are unfortunate to have had the virus, however they would have picked it up. Not to mention other persons who are not affected but who are from a similar home or family environment. And I think it's very important that I ask the public to exercise some care as it relates to this. We're all in this thing together, and no matter how much we try, we're not going to eliminate, through aggression or otherwise, the existence or the threat that is represented here with this virus. It really is through a coordinated attempt. Now, I know I'm long-winded in giving a simple response, but nevertheless, I understand the unfortunate elements of our culture, and I think it's important to say for the record. But the person is in on the board of St. Thomas and St. Andrew.
Stays in the body? Yes. You mean in terms of how long the person is infectious? Okay. So that's two different things, all right? So the person is infectious, as we know, and let us understand that new information is happening every day, okay? And so we get more and more information, and we will update as we get the information. But as it is now, the virus can be passed on to persons when the patient has symptoms. So once the patient stops having symptoms, then what we tend to do is we tend to do 2 repeated tests, okay, over a period of 48 to 2 to 4 days to see if there is virus still present. And based on that, then we will say that it is safe to discharge the person. However, as I said, we have information is changing, new information, and we will update as needed.
What's the condition of this patient? Is it mild, severe symptoms?
Right now, the patient is stable, okay, and we have mild symptoms. I would ask Dr. Bruce if he wants to expand on that.
No, the patient, as CMO said, is stable, and we will continue to observe the patient.
Okay, let's mix it up a little. Is there anybody on this side who wants to ask a question? No? All right, I'll come back to this side.
How is the hospital adapted to this development?
The ministry and the hospital has been using the time since January to prepare. So our team has an operational plan, and as of yesterday, they executed that plan.
There's a football match in North tomorrow, Redhead Boys versus Tornado. Any plans, any protocols in place for that? Is it still going to happen? Will it be canceled?
In responding to that question, I'm responding also to the question about cases coming in from all the different countries. Because we have to recognize that Jamaica now falls into the category of one of those countries that has one imported case. An imported case for every country means that they are going to isolate that case, they are going to do the necessary contact tracing, and they are going to try to contain that to a specific area and try to narrow that down daily, okay? So it does not mean that the entire country is contaminated, all right? So right now we have one imported case that has been isolated. The public health team is a strong team that is going to be out there doing the contact investigations. We have started to do that already. We have started to look at the circle of persons. We are ensuring that those persons stay under controlled situations that we can monitor effectively. Okay.
I want to raise another issue which I think is important. At some point in time, the country will have to engage in a conversation, and we will have to initiate that conversation around the dissecting the data, the numbers of persons who are affected, if eventually we have community spread. The reality is that the virus does not symbolize a death sentence for those who are so infected. And that's very important. In fact, the numbers that we placed in the public domain through a public broadcast I made a few days ago indicated that the vast majority of Jamaicans who may be contaminated with the virus will recover. And it also outlines very clearly who the vulnerable groups are. Older persons with underlying conditions, compromised immune systems, and so on. So while it is our intention, and we encourage cooperation from the public in this regard, to keep the virus out of Jamaica or to contain it when it is discovered, we do not want persons to engage in panic because they interpret the virus to mean the most extreme result. Because that is certainly not the history of the virus in other countries. And we certainly know it won't be the case here. We just have to deal with it, and that's what we are doing.
Minister, are we contemplating travel restrictions for the UK and any other European countries as of today?
Well, I announced in my presentation that we are imposing on 3 additional countries. For now, those are the 3, Spain, Germany, and France.
Any advice for Jamaicans?
But the assessment is an ongoing assessment.
Any advice for Jamaicans going on cruises, cruise ships?
Well, I will only say what I said in the statement, that we certainly discourage non-essential travel as an important part of this. So if your cruise is absolutely essential, then it wouldn't fall in that category. But if it's not, then one would have to be advised. And the same would apply for air travel also, by the way.
Minister, a patient escaped from a quarantine facility yesterday. Can you, 1, explain to us what happened, and 2, talk to me about whether or not there's any plans to beef up security at quarantine facilities and what?
Yeah. All right. So yes, the patient did leave the facility where he was under quarantine conditions. He was subsequently retrieved and placed back in the facility. There has been a discussion with the constabulary around security arrangements at these facilities. I had a conversation with the police commissioner, and we are in dialogue around what needs to be done additionally, because we do get support to ensure that this does not happen again. The person who left the facility did so not just against the will of the healthcare professionals, but also in contravention of the law. And so proceedings will be levied against the person. They'll be charged, because we have to discourage this kind of activity. Our responsibility as a government and as a ministry is to protect the well-being of the society. And if persons knowingly puts the rest of us in a compromising position, then the law has a response for that. So that will take its course. But while we're doing that, we're going to ensure that we beef up the arrangement. It's important, though, to add, as I believe the clinicians can come in and support, that the person was in quarantine for observation, but the person was not displaying symptoms. The quarantine facilities is as a result of the person coming from a country of interest, a Jamaican, coming from one of those 5 countries. We place them under a 14-day quarantine arrangement, even though they display good health, and because that's the period of time that the virus would take to show symptoms, and then we release them. And we have done that to a number of Jamaicans, both in their home setting and at the government institutions. So the fact that the person went out doesn't necessarily symbolize a threat.
But they're there's a possibility.
But there's a possibility. So what we're doing now is observing, and the reality is that if the person is unfortunate to demonstrate symptoms, then we have to now engage in another phase, which is the tracing of where the person went, who they were in contact with, and then those persons will be brought into the net. So let's hope that doesn't occur, but nevertheless, it's an activity that we have to discourage because it does place all of us with a greater burden and at risk.
Could the person who drove the car that took the person away, could be charged as well? Is there any possibility of that?
I have to leave that to the investigators. I can't tell you that right offhand. I don't want to. I'm a novice lawyer, so I would venture there to give you a response. We stated the age. It's a young person.
It's a young adult. We will provide more information as time goes by that will enable us to carry out our public health measures. Right now, it is crucial that we make the initial contacts and we try to get persons in as much as possible. So we would, as soon as we're able, we'll provide additional information to the public. Yes. Right. So this whole period of quarantine, persons have demonstrated several effects, not just on the persons in quarantine, but the persons who are attending to them. And we have put in place measures in terms of psychological support, and we will continue to do so. And especially when situations like this happen, it just says to us that to look to see what else we can do to help to alleviate the fears and to calm the nerves and enable them to go through this period safely.
Does this virus target some particular race?
Right now, the virus is in 105 countries. I think it is clear that it does not target a particular race. However, we will continue to review the information that is being provided to us, and if we get any such information, we will update you.
The virus does not discriminate. And nor are we in terms of our strategy. Let me say, nationwide as a APCA.
We are presently going through the complete itinerary of that person in order to be able to do the contact tracing. As I said, it's very important for us to demonstrate whether the risk is localized or how wide it is, because that is going to determine what kind of public health measures that we are going to have to put in.
No. The person did come to Jamaica to attend a particular event. I think it's an event that you have referred to. Right, so yes, but the investigations would be of a particular approach that would determine when the person actually demonstrated symptoms. And so one of the reasons why we are cautious to sort of elaborate. We don't want people at that event to start running all over the place and sounding alarm as if they have a virus. Remember now, the virus spreads up to this point based on the clinical information we have when persons display symptoms through droplets, through coughing, sneezing, that sort of thing. So the fact that the person may have attended an event doesn't necessarily mean that those persons are exposed. It's subject to the investigation, which is why the Chief Medical Officer is being conservative until she has further information.
How long do we expect this investigation to go on? And when will the public be informed about it?
Well, you're really harsh on us. I mean, we learned about this thing 11 o'clock and we call a press conference for 12. So I think you can credit us with doing fairly well so far in terms of keeping the public informed. As soon as the information is available, we will make it available. It's very important. I mean, I take the position as the team is with me and the government that there is no value to anyone in holding back information from the public. We reserve the right to hold back information as it relates to the confidentiality of patient information, as it is the case with any hospital arrangement. None of us wants the world to know what our medical history, our medical conditions are, okay, without our permission. That's standard protocol in clinical practice. So we may have to manage that. We reserve the right to withhold information so as not to create panic amongst persons who really ought not to feel panicked, which is why we are cautious in terms of where that person went. But everything else, to my mind, should be made public, and that's what we're trying to do. So in answer to your question, as soon as we have the information, but we're treating the matter as an absolute priority because containment requires efficiency of execution. Any other questions?
Yes, Dr. Doctor, the quarantine, I'd like to ask you, the quarantine facilities, Dr. Mrs. mentioned some time ago that the St. Joseph's Hospital was included in the 4 new quarantine facilities. What are the other ones?
Again, we have the 2 that you know, and there are 2 or 3 others that are being worked on. Until they're officially up, we'll just work on them. Any other? Yes. The same. Well, I think Abka Fitzhenley, who has a reputation for knowing the news before the news breaks, actually mentioned what she came here for. I don't know if she came here for other things. I mean, people travel back and forth for all sorts of reasons, but there was an event that she attended, the person attended. A funeral. The person attended a funeral. Exactly. They attended a funeral, and I don't know what else they may have come for.
I think it is important for the media to understand that in this initial phase where we need to make sure that we contact persons and we need to ensure that we get them to comply with the procedures that we would put in place, it is with regards to that we are not divulging everything at this time. So as soon as we are able to, we do have some information, but as soon as we are able to provide that to you without jeopardizing the public health investigation that is taking place, then we will do so.
I want to use the opportunity to acknowledge the head of ADPEM, Mr. Richard Thompson, who is sitting to my far right, your left, and also Mr. Kevin Allen, who is CEO of the University Hospital, of course, Dr. Bruce, who is the Chief Medical Officer at the University Hospital. That's the hospital where the patient is now in quarantine. I really think that isolation. I really think that maybe Dr. Bruce should just indicate, because what we don't want is for people to feel like they have to avoid the University Hospital. Just indicate what the isolation facilities involve, and just to reassure the public that the University Hospital is continuing business as usual and providing the vital services that it is accustomed to providing. Dr. Bruce?
Thank you, Minister. So the University Hospital at Mona has 3 what we call negative pressure isolation facilities, which are facilities where we can house patients who, as you know, we consider who are at risk for spreading or transmitting an infection such as this. So we are currently using one of our isolation rooms, and that was that started from yesterday. But the patient is not in contact with the rest of our patient population, and the team that's managing the patient has been trained as such. So we're happy that both the situation for protection of the patient and the staff and the members of the public has been operationalized, and we're very happy at this time with those protocols.
In other words, since I'm a non-doctor, I can put it in layman's term. The university hospital is open for business. It is fully functional and equipped to carry out its duties. And as it relates to this particular patient, they are not in contact with the rest of the population, and therefore no one should feel exposed or overly exposed from attending to services, to access services at the hospital. The facilities there I've seen, they're very good facilities. They are made for this kind of thing. Coronavirus is not the only infectious disease. There are several others that they've had to deal with that you would not have known about. It's just that this is the topical issue, and we're keeping you informed. So do not, I repeat, do not feel that the university hospital somehow needs to either be picketed or to be avoided because we have this particular case treating. Okay? Any other? We'll close off if, yes, sir. Okay, that is a good question. So yesterday, the Cabinet of Jamaica, led of course by the Honorable Prime Minister, approved a submission that was carried there by myself, supported by the team on either side of me, to allocate approximately 2 billion Jamaican dollars, 1.9 something, to bolster the response of the public health system to support the possibility of containment and case management, as well as to strengthen the border control measures that are in place. So a plan was presented, a budget, and the Cabinet approved that plan and budget. So it will see a number of things, expanding certain types of equipment, medicines, training, isolation or quarantining, and all the associated activities that are related to that. So yes, we have been given the budget that we require based on the concern. Right. And the capacity to procure quickly also is one other. Any other question?
Mr. Thompson, can you just give us an idea of the ODPX rolling out?
What are you going to do that now? You want to? Just exchange here from now. Yeah.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Well, the ODPEM is the National Disaster Coordinator. We spearhead a very robust national disaster risk management framework. And for a public health emergency of this nature, the Ministry of Health is the lead entity. But we all know that anything that can manifest itself into a wider crisis or a disaster takes greater coordination and a pooling of major resources. So you know from this perspective, you'd realize that border control and security plays a critical role. You're talking about customs and immigration. You're talking about the possibility as it relates to food security and a number of different variables. You'd have heard Minister Tufton spoke already about some aspect of the border security measures. So because it would take greater coordination outside of the specific health component, it requires a greater national response process. And coming out of the meeting of the National Disaster Risk Management Council, which is chaired by the Most Honorable Prime Minister Andrew Holness, he would have already given his charge for the national framework to be activated and to look at then a kind of preparedness measure, but now, given where we are, more of a kind of response process. So it would require greater sectorial collaboration and greater resources. So thus, the ODPEM, as the National Disaster Coordinator, would play that coordinating role with the Ministry of Health being the lead entity, given that it's a public health emergency.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I am sure you will hear from us in the coming days, because I know you'll be anxious to hear what is happening in terms of the follow-up activities. There are certain decisions that may have to be taken, which we will brief you on. So issues around public gatherings, events that are on the national calendar that some of them you asked about earlier. I have already confirmed that in terms of the pen relays, the Ministry of Education and the Cabinet, through the Cabinet's instructions, have advised schools around not participating in the pen relays this year. We will comment further on boys and girls champs and on any other public gathering in the days coming. We think we have this matter under control in terms of the treatment and the containment of this individual. The areas that we have no control over, but we are assessing, would be the period of time that the person showed symptoms but was out in the open. So in this instance, when they were being transported to the hospital, the doctor, to see the medical team. But we have taken note of that. We have done the interrogation. We know who to contact. We have already made contact. And what we have to do is observe. So we are doing the work while keeping our fingers crossed that this individual is the only affected individual at this point in time. If anything changes as it relates to that or anything else, we will inform you to help us to inform the public. I'm going to close by asking the public, through you, and I thank you for the opportunity, not to engage in unnecessary or to engage at all, frankly speaking, in speculation. Give me some other words to describe it. Rumors, rumor mongering, hysteria, or otherwise. The greatest challenge we have, one of the big challenges we have, is the promotion of inaccurate information, because it really promotes panic in our society, which is not necessary. I'm going to ask the media, while it is not your duty, if you are not the ones sending out the information, to correct to the extent that you see information that is not accurate or you are doubtful about. Use the toll-free number and call. We have a media center here, but you can use that number to clarify and help us to correct where that correction is required, because we really want everyone to be on the same page so that there's no chance of misinterpretation or actions that become counter to what we're actually trying to do. So we thank you again, and we will follow up, I'm sure, with the further developments. Thank you.
You've just seen our live broadcast of the Health Ministry's emergency press conference, where it was announced that Jamaica now has the first imported case of COVID-19. Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton made the announcement at the just concluded press conference. It was at the Ministry of Health. The Prime Minister will also host a press conference shortly, and we will be standing by to take that as soon as it begins. A bit of background: the infected person arrived in the island on March 4 and is from the border of St. Thomas and St. Andrew. Now we'll have more details on this developing story in primetime news at 7. And that's where we put a wrap on the midday news and on this broadcast. Please stay tuned, pleasant viewing, and have a good day.